The ballroom shimmered like something torn from a royal fantasy. Crystal chandeliers spilled golden light across marble floors, while soft violin music floated through the air. Guests laughed beside towers of champagne glasses. An expensive perfume mixed with the scent of fresh roses decorating every table. Adrian stood near the back of the room, adjusting the sleeves of the only suit he still owned. He already felt out of place. The wealthy side of the family barely acknowledged him as they passed. Some offered fake smiles. Others didn't bother pretending. To them, Adrian was the disappointment, the son who walked away from the family business 5 years earlier to build a small furniture workshop instead of joining his father's real estate empire. Still making chairs for strangers, his uncle Victor mocked earlier that evening. Adrian simply smiled. Tables too. The joke earned laughter from nearby relatives. He was used to it. Still, tonight wasn't supposed to be about old wounds. Tonight was Elena's wedding. His little sister looked beautiful in her white gown, standing beneath hanging orchids beside her wealthy fiancé, Daniel Whitmore. Cameras flashed endlessly while guests admired the perfect couple. For one night, Adrian wanted peace, even if it was fake. As the ceremony ended and applause filled the ballroom, Adrian caught Elena glancing toward him. Her smile weakened for a second. There was something strange in her eyes, fear. Before he could walk over, a heavy hand landed on his shoulder. His father, Richard Vale, stood tall in a black tuxedo, silver hair perfectly combed, his expression sharp enough to cut glass. Even at 62, the man carried the terrifying presence that once controlled every room Adrian entered as a child. "We need to speak," Richard said coldly. Adrian nodded quietly and followed him toward the center of the ballroom. Conversations slowly faded as people noticed them together. Years of family tension had turned them into entertainment for relatives hungry for drama. Richard reached into his jacket and removed a sealed envelope. "For you," he announced. Adrian frowned slightly. "What is this? Open it." Something inside Adrian's chest tightened. He tore the envelope carefully while dozens of curious eyes watched. Inside rested several folded legal papers stamped with official seals. His breathing stopped. Disownment notice. The words blurred for a second beneath the chandelier lights. A quiet murmur spread across the ballroom. Richard's voice remained emotionless. "As of today, you are no longer recognized as part of this family, nor will you receive future claims to family assets, property, or business interests." Someone near the bar gasped. Adrian slowly looked up. "You're doing this here. You made your choices years ago." Richard replied loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "You abandoned responsibility. You embarrassed this family with your failures. This is simply making things official." The humiliation burned hotter than fire. Adrian noticed relatives avoiding his eyes while others openly watched with satisfaction. One cousin even lifted a phone slightly, recording the moment. Across the ballroom, Elena looked pale. "Dad," she whispered weakly, but Richard ignored her. "You wanted independence," he continued. "Now you have it completely." Adrian felt every childhood memory crashing into him at once. The impossible expectations, the constant criticism, the years spent trying to earn love that always came with conditions. For a moment, anger nearly exploded inside him. He could scream, expose years of cruelty, ruin the wedding. Instead, he folded the papers carefully and slipped them back into the envelope. The silence unsettled everyone more than rage would have. "That's it," Victor scoffed. No dramatic speech. Adrian ignored him. His eyes drifted toward Elena again. She looked terrified now, gripping her bouquet so tightly her hands shook. Daniel whispered something urgently beside her, but she barely responded. That fear in her face wasn't about him, it was about something else, something bigger. Adrian suddenly remembered a conversation he accidentally overheard weeks earlier between two company executives, mentioning hidden audits and missing funds. At the time, he dismissed it as business stress. Now the pieces felt different, dangerous. Richard stepped closer. "You are no longer my son." The words landed heavily, but strangely, Adrian no longer looked broken. He looked awake. Without another word, Adrian turned and walked across the silent ballroom. Guests moved aside as he passed. The orchestra had stopped playing completely. Right before reaching the exit doors, Adrian paused briefly. Then he looked back at his family one final time, not with anger, not with sadness, but with the calm expression of a man who had just realized the people who destroyed him were hiding something far worse than betrayal. 3 days after the wedding, the internet was still feeding on Adrian's humiliation. Someone had uploaded a short video of Richard handing him the disownment letter. Millions of people watched the wealthy businessman publicly erase his own son with cold precision. Comment sections exploded with opinions, sympathy, and mockery. But Adrian never responded. No interviews, no angry posts, no public accusations, nothing. And that silence began terrifying the Vale family more than outrage ever could. Adrian sat alone inside his small furniture workshop on the edge of the city, sanding the surface of an unfinished oak table, while rain hammered softly against the windows. The smell of sawdust usually calmed him, but tonight his mind wouldn't rest. He kept replaying Elena's face at the wedding. Fear, not guilt, fear. His phone vibrated again across the workbench, father calling. Adrian stared at the screen until it stopped. A second later another call appeared. Elena, ignored, then Victor, then unknown numbers. He muted the phone completely. The silence wasn't revenge. It was observation. For the first time in years, Adrian stopped reacting emotionally to his family. And once emotions disappeared, patterns became easier to see. At exactly 8:30 that evening, the workshop bell rang. Adrian looked up cautiously as an older woman stepped inside, wearing a dark coat soaked with rainwater. Martha, he asked in surprise. Martha Green had once been the chief accountant for the Vale Corporation. She worked beside Richard for nearly 20 years before suddenly disappearing 2 years ago. Officially, the company claimed she retired early for health reasons. Unofficially, rumors said she had been fired after a violent argument with Richard. "You shouldn't have come here," Adrian said quietly. Martha removed her gloves slowly. "Your father already assumes I have." Her tired eyes settled on the envelope still sitting on Adrian's desk. "So he finally did it." Adrian gave a bitter smile, publicly too. Martha stepped closer and lowered her voice. "Adrian, your disownment has nothing to do with disappointment." His expression hardened. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering immediately, Martha opened her leather bag and carefully placed several folders onto the wooden table. Bank statements, legal forms, transaction records. Adrian's heartbeat slowed dangerously. "I copied these before I left the company," she whispered. "I've been waiting years to know whether you were involved willingly." "Involved in what?" Martha opened one file and pointed toward a signature. Adrian froze. His name, his signature, attached to offshore financial transfers worth millions. "That's impossible," he said immediately. "I never signed this." "I know," Martha replied softly, "because some of these documents were created after you left the company." Cold shock spread through his body. Page after page revealed hidden accounts, shell corporations, tax fraud, and property transfers connected to the Vale Empire. And somehow, Adrian's identity appeared repeatedly throughout the records. "They used me," he muttered. Martha nodded grimly. "Your father needed someone outside the company structure, someone connected enough to carry legal responsibility if investigators ever looked deeper." Adrian leaned heavily against the table. Suddenly, the disownment letter made perfect sense. Richard wasn't removing a failure from the family. He was cutting loose evidence. "What about Elena?" Adrian asked carefully. Martha hesitated. "That's the complicated part." She handed him another document, a merger agreement involving Daniel Whitmore's investment firm and the collapsing Vale Corporation. "The company is drowning," Martha explained. "Debt, investigations, frozen assets. Elena's marriage saved them financially." Adrian stared at the paper silently. She knew, not everything, Martha admitted, but enough to stay quiet. The workshop suddenly felt suffocating. Outside, thunder rolled across the dark sky. Adrian slowly closed the files and looked toward the rain-covered windows. His entire childhood flashed through his mind, the pressure, the control, the manipulation disguised as family loyalty. Richard had prepared this for years, and when danger approached, he handed Adrian a disownment letter like a sacrificial offering. Martha touched his arm gently. "You need a lawyer immediately," but Adrian barely heard her, because for the first time since the wedding, anger finally returned. Not loud anger, not reckless anger, the kind that becomes calm, precise, dangerous. He looked back at the legal files covering his workbench and spoke quietly enough that Martha almost missed it. If they wanted silence, Adrian said, they should have treated me like family before teaching me how to survive without one. The Whitmore estate overlooked the ocean like a palace built for royalty. White marble fountains glimmered beneath moonlight, while luxury cars lined the circular driveway. Inside, soft jazz floated through the massive halls where politicians, investors, and business elites gathered for Elena and Daniel's private honeymoon celebration. Every smile in the room looked expensive. Every conversation sounded fake. And at the center of it all stood the Vale family, pretending their empire wasn't quietly collapsing beneath their feet. Richard Vale held a glass of champagne while speaking confidently with investors, but the strain around his eyes betrayed him. Since the wedding, rumors surrounding the company had worsened. Financial reporters started asking dangerous questions. Auditors circled closer every day. Worst of all, Adrian still hadn't spoken publicly. That silence was poisoning Richard's control. "Have you heard from him?" Daniel quietly asked Elena beside the staircase. She shook her head nervously. Not once. Her wedding ring suddenly felt heavier than gold. For days she barely slept, haunted by the memory of Adrian walking out of the ballroom without fighting back. She knew her brother better than anyone. Adrian shouted when hurt. He argued when angry, but silence. Silence meant he was thinking, and that terrified her. The mansion door suddenly opened. Conversations softened instantly. Adrian walked inside wearing a simple black suit untouched by luxury brands or designer labels. Rainwater darkened his coat slightly from the storm outside, but he moved through the room with unsettling calm. Several guests whispered immediately, "That's the disowned son. What is he doing here?" Richard's jaw tightened. "Who invited him? No one," Elena whispered weakly. Adrian ignored the whispers and walked directly toward the family table at the center of the ballroom. In his hand rested a thick gray legal file. No expression crossed his face, no rage, no humiliation. "Just certainty, Elena," he said quietly. His sister looked like she might collapse. "Adrian, please don't do this here." Richard stepped forward instantly. "You have no right to enter this property." Adrian finally looked at his father. "Actually, after what you placed under my name, I think I have several rights." The room froze. Daniel frowned carefully. "What does that mean?" Without another word, Adrian placed the thick legal file onto the polished dining table. The sound echoed through the silent ballroom. Richard's face lost color immediately. "No," he breathed. Adrian opened the file slowly, revealing copies of bank transfers, forged signatures, shell corporations, tax records, and hidden offshore accounts. Every page carried dates, transaction numbers, and legal certifications. Guests nearby leaned closer in disbelief. Daniel picked up one document, scanning it quickly before looking toward Richard with growing confusion. "What is this?" Richard grabbed the paper violently. "It's nonsense. It's evidence," Adrian corrected calmly. Elena's hands trembled as Adrian pulled out another document and placed it directly in front of her. "Their late mother's inheritance records, millions missing, transferred secretly over years. You told me Mom's trust was empty," Elena whispered. Richard's voice hardened instantly. Enough. But Adrian kept going. "There are copies already with federal investigators," he said quietly. And with 2 separate law firms. The entire room exploded into whispers. Daniel stepped away from the table slowly, staring at his father-in-law like a stranger for the first time. "You used Adrian's identity?" he asked carefully. Richard's silence answered everything. Elena suddenly looked sick. "You knew?" Adrian asked her softly. Tears filled her eyes instantly. Not all of it, but enough. She couldn't deny it. That hurt more than the disownment letter ever could. For several seconds nobody moved. Then Richard slammed his fist against the table. "You ungrateful little bastard. Everything I built was for this family." Adrian met his fury without flinching. "No," he replied quietly. "Everything you built was for yourself." The words cut deeper than shouting ever could. Adrian closed the legal file carefully before stepping back from the table. "I didn't come here for revenge," he said. "I came because innocent people are about to drown beside your lies. Elena began crying silently, but Adrian didn't comfort her. Not this time. He simply turned toward the doors as thunder echoed outside the mansion windows. "Adrian," Elena whispered brokenly. He paused briefly without looking back. Then he spoke the final words that shattered what remained of their family. "You handed me a disownment letter," he said softly, "so I learned how to live like I owed you nothing." The collapse began quietly. 3 days after Adrian left the Whitmore estate, federal investigators entered Vale Corporation headquarters, carrying sealed warrants and hard drives. News helicopters circled above the glass skyscraper while reporters crowded outside like vultures sensing death. By noon, every major business network carried the same headline: Richard Vale under investigation for fraud and financial crimes. Investors panicked, stocks crashed, partnerships vanished overnight, and for the first time in decades, the mighty Vale name no longer inspired respect. Only scandal. Adrian watched everything unfold from the small television inside his workshop, while finishing a handcrafted dining table for a local customer. The reporter's voice echoed through the room describing frozen accounts, hidden offshore money, and falsified corporate records. Martha had been right. Once investigators found one lie, the entire empire started falling apart. His phone rang constantly now. Relatives who ignored him for years suddenly begged to talk privately. Old family friends claimed they always supported him. Journalists offered money for exclusive interviews. Adrian answered none of them. Outside his workshop, life continued normally. Customers still arrived for repairs. Wood still needed sanding. Bills still needed paying. Strangely, peace returned faster than he expected. One rainy afternoon, a black luxury car stopped outside the workshop. Adrian already knew who stepped out before the door opened. Elena, she looked nothing like the glowing bride from weeks earlier. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her expensive coat hung loosely from her exhausted frame. The confidence she once carried had disappeared completely. For a moment, neither sibling spoke. Then Elena quietly asked, "Can I come in?" Adrian nodded once. She stepped carefully through the workshop, staring at unfinished tables and shelves coated with sawdust. Years ago, she used to visit here secretly after college classes, bringing Adrian coffee while Richard mocked the business as garage-level embarrassment. Now that little workshop looked more honest than the empire that destroyed itself. "Elena," Adrian finally said softly, "why are you here?" Her eyes filled immediately. "Dad was arrested this morning." The words settled heavily between them. Adrian stayed silent. "He still thinks he can fix everything," she whispered bitterly. "Even now, he keeps blaming everyone else." She looked around the workshop before speaking again. "I should have warned you." Adrian's jaw tightened slightly. "I knew something was wrong," she admitted. "Not everything, but enough to know Dad was hiding money and using fake accounts. Daniel found out after you brought the files. Is he leaving you?" Elena laughed weakly through tears. "His lawyers already are." The room fell quiet except for rain tapping the windows. Finally, Elena reached into her purse and removed the disownment letter Richard handed Adrian at the wedding. The edges looked worn from being folded repeatedly. "I found this in Dad's office after the arrest," she said. He kept another copy. Adrian stared at the envelope silently. "He said removing you from the family protected the company," Elena whispered. "But I think he was afraid of you becoming better than him." That hurt more than she probably realized, because part of Adrian once spent years desperately wanting his father's approval. Now there was nothing left to earn. Elena stepped closer carefully. "I'm sorry." The apology sounded small compared to everything that happened, but it was real. Adrian looked at his sister for a long moment before quietly taking the envelope from her hands. "I forgive you," he said. Fresh tears rolled down her face. But then he added softly, "That doesn't mean things go back to how they were." Elena nodded painfully. "I know." Hours later, after she left, Adrian drove alone to the cemetery at the edge of the city. Rain drifted lightly through the cold evening air as he stood beside his mother's grave, holding the disownment letter. For years he believed losing his family would destroy him. Instead, it revealed who they truly were. Adrian pulled out a lighter and set the envelope on fire. The paper curled slowly into ash beneath the stormy sky. And as the flames disappeared, Adrian finally understood something his father never would. The sweetest revenge was never making them suffer. It was surviving long enough to become free.